Hi there, in this video we are going to learn about the Pythagorean Theorem. So your objective for today is to use the Pythagorean Theorem to find the length of a side of a triangle. So here is an example of a right triangle. We only use Pythagorean Theorem when it comes to right triangles. And before we can get to the theorem itself, we have to be able to identify what A, B, and C are. So A is one side length, so A is here, and B is here. And together those two sides are called the legs of a triangle. So the legs of and they make up the right triangle. So I just added a little 90-degree symbol there. And the hypotenuse is the slant. So the hypotenuse is this line down here, that is your slant. Now the theorem itself says a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. So, which means that this side length squared plus this side length squared has to equal this side length squared. If they don't equal, if this theorem doesn't work out, then it's not a true right triangle. All right, so let's start going over how to do that. So here is our first example. So we need to find the length of this hypotenuse. So we are given a right triangle. I'm going to input the little symbol here so that you know. And we'll get started. So the theorem is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. So I'm going to call 8a, I'm going to call 15b, because they make up the legs of this right triangle, and the slant, or the diagonal, is c. So now I'm going to input my numbers into the theorem and then solve. So if 8 is a, 8 squared, b is 15, so plus 15 squared, and that is going to equal c squared. So 8 squared, which is 8 times 8, is 64. 15 squared, or 15 times 15, is 225. And we don't know what c squared is yet. So 64 plus 225 gets you 289. All right, and now at this point, 289 is what c squared is. We need to figure out what c alone is. So, in order to find what c is, you have to do the opposite of squaring a number. The opposite of squaring a number is taking its square root. So I am going to take the square root of c, and that's what will cancel out my square here, the c squared. So when I do that, I end up just getting c, and whatever I do to the one side of an equation, I have to do to the other. So I have to take the square root of 289. So in other words, what two numbers are going to multiply to get 289? So you need to find this little radical symbol on your calculator and then use it. So the square root of 289 gets you 17. So for our a squared plus b squared equals c squared, if a is 8, b is 15, then c is equal to 17. All right, moving on. So our next example shows a balloon advertising the opening of a store is tethered to the ground as shown. About how many feet above the ground is the balloon? So I'm just going to input the little symbol here. And let's remember that A and B are our legs. And then C is the hypotenuse. So we have A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. A squared, we don't know what that is. B squared is 25 squared. which will get us c squared. Or actually, sorry about that, I'm given c squared. I'm given 40 squared. There we go. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a. So I'm going to start solving. A squared, I don't know what that is yet. 25 squared, 25 times 25, 625. And then 40 squared is 1,600. Okay, and I'm just going to solve this like any other equation. So minus 625. Whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other. And you end up getting a squared is equal to 1,600 minus 625 gets you 975. All right, and then I have a squared is equal to that. So I need to figure out what the square root of it is. So again, the square root cancels out the square. So that'll leave you with just a. So the square root of 975 is really, it's about 31.2. And this is feet that we're talking about. All right. So in our next example, we have another right triangle. Let me draw in the box here and we'll get started. So A and B are your legs. This is A, this is B, and then C is the hypotenuse. So A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. So A squared is 24 squared. B squared, 45 squared. C squared is just C squared. We don't know what C is yet. That's what we're looking for. So 24 squared is, I'm going to change the color here. 24 squared is 576. 45 squared is 2025. And C squared, we don't know what C squared is yet. We are trying to find C. And now we can continue to solve. So 576 plus 2025 will get us 2601. Make that equal to C squared. And now we have to do the opposite of squaring, which is finding the square root. So the square root of 2601 is 51. And this is 51 inches. All right, and then in our last example, here, we have a 15-foot ladder is leaning against the house. The base of the ladder is 3.5 feet away from the house. How many feet does a ladder reach on the side of the house? So I am going to actually draw a picture of this house and ladder so that we have a better idea of what we're talking about. So here is my beautiful drawing of my house. All right, and here is my ladder. And here is the ground. All right, so the ladder is 3.5 feet from the house. So again, here's my house. And this ladder is 3.5 feet away. So I'm going to make the right triangle a little bit more distinct here. Okay. So 3.5 is down here, 3.5 feet away from the house. The ladder itself is 15 feet. All right, so we need to figure out about how many feet does the ladder reach on the side of the house. So we need to figure out the length from down here to up here. All right, and it makes a right triangle. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to call that missing piece A. We're going to call this B, and we're going to call this C. All right, so we have A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. So we said A is our missing piece, so A squared. B is 3.5, and C is 15. All right, so A squared, we're still going to drop that down because we don't know what it is. 3.5 squared is 12.25. 12.25. And 15 squared is 225. All right, and now we can continue to solve this equation. So I'm actually going to use a different color here. So we're going to subtract 12.25 on both sides. All right, these cancel out. You're left with A squared equals 225 minus 12.25 will get you 212.75. Now here you need to do the opposite of squaring a number, which is taking the square root. So when you take the square root on both sides, all right, you end up getting A equals the square root of 212.75 is about 14.6. And we're talking about feet. All right, so just some concluding thoughts for you. A and B are always the legs of a right triangle. So let me just erase this, sorry. So A and B are always the legs of the right triangle. C is always the hypotenuse or the slant or the diagonal, whatever you want to call it, of the triangle. And when solving an equation, the inverse of a square is a square root. All right, so that is extremely important for you to know. All right, that is it. I hope you learned how to use the Pythagorean theorem. Thank you for watching.